Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli. We are here today for Season 2, Episode number 14 with James Roberts. James Roberts was born with a congenital disability called femoral dysplasia of the left leg and a floating hip and scoliosis of the spine. He represented the UK at 4 World Championships, amongst others, as well as 2 Paralympics. And James will be joining the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about his own story and his physical as well as his mental development throughout this process. So, James, thanks for taking this time out to be on the Mental Insights Podcast.
Oh, Brendan, it's my absolute pleasure to come on.
Thank you for taking this time. And I think it's going to be awesome to not only share your story, but share how you're able to really use your impact and development in order to help others throughout, your own journey and people who experience similar issues. And that seems to be kind of the revolving door around a lot of people within personal development. Usually it's they've experienced something, they've had a challenge, and they learn to get through it. They learn to overcome it. And now they have kind of this inspiration in order to help others, which is so beautiful to see. And, really to just start off with your own experiences and give us a little bit more about your own story. Can you just explain about kind of the development of yourself and just, what you were really experiencing as a challenge throughout this physical disability in, your early childhood throughout as you were coming up within your life?
Well, I think if I'm honest, Brendan, I probably still to this day never see it as an adverse situation because I know no different. This is the life that I've come to know. Obviously, my family are no different than the normal. Even if their son or daughter was able-bodied, I was treated no differently from that, and that's probably why. When I see things in the newspaper, in the news nowadays, as to the family has to adjust to the kid having a disability, I'm thinking, why? It's ultimately, if you don't treat them any differently, okay, mentally you can see that you're different from everybody else, but if you make a big deal out of it, obviously the kid's going to have a problem with it. So I think for me, with that in mind, I think it's a kind of an old school approach. It's kind of a one that's disappearing slowly but surely, which is probably a bad thing. Is I had a mentality of brought up as you sink or you swim. You either metaphorically survive or you drown. I'm not going to make excuses or hide behind this disability. It's not going to hold me back. Yes, it's going to be difficult and it's going to pose its challenges, but it's not going to give me an excuse to give up. It's going to give me tools and resources to kind of push through. I think you mentioned in terms of how did it kind of help me as a kid. It's very much, I think, because of that mindset in itself of trying to come up with adaptations or in itself modifications to simple tasks. Okay, I would call them simple tasks nowadays because they're not difficult whatsoever, but trying to do things that obviously my friends and peers took for granted in elementary school, and probably latterly maybe the early beginnings of like junior high and maybe a little bit less in high school. I had to come up with a modification to those simple tasks of, okay, the health and safety aspect probably goes out the window altogether, but in those days, we are talking about probably 25 years ago plus, whereas a little bit less so in that way of monkey bars. I had to come up with a solution of how do I get to be able to get to those heights in the first place. Once I'm there, it's not a difficult thing because my body strength is probably more developed, but it was trying to find that resolve to get there in the first place. And my mum likes to remind me of this story that she could see me sitting on the side, but could kind of metaphorically seeing the cogs going around in my head. Well, how am I gonna get over this adversity and difficult situation to not be able to play with my peers? And in a space of probably no more than 2 to 3 days, I'd come up with a solution to be able to do it. And I've been very much meticulous in that way of thinking ever since. It's like this is a hurdle, a roadblock, a wall that is being put in front of me. How do I get to the other side and ultimately the success of it? I think as I got older and progressed probably to a teenager, you want to bat those naysayers and those people kind of, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Obviously, from that perspective, energy wise is a bad thing altogether, because now as a coach myself, I would probably steer clear. It's like, we don't want to go down that route if you can help it, because that's negative energy, because you're trying to prove people wrong as opposed to maybe not necessarily doing it for yourself. Okay, ultimately I was from a sporting perspective, I was doing it for myself because I was just trying to prove a point as to, you have a perception that I can't do it. I'm going to show you that that no matter what your difference is, it's not going to limit me. I'm going to do whatever I want within reason to be able to fit in. Whereas I'd quite happily be on the outside now, as to, well, I don't mind being the black sheep of the group. If it makes me stand out from the crowds, people are going to look at me from a positive perspective, because, oh, he's different. Why is he different? Let's go have a look. Whereas I think you go back probably 20 years ago, and maybe lesser degree to a certain extent, probably up until when mental health really become mainstream, you would look at it from a negative perspective. You don't want to be the black sheep. You don't want to be the outcast. You want to fit in as best as you can. Whereas I'd say to people, because I work with more specifically fellow amputees, you're different already. Yeah. Kind of accept that. People are gonna stop and stare. People do ask me, well, how do you deal with it? I love it, because ultimately it does. It's more people that are around me or new coming into my life are the ones that have a problem with it, because it's like, well, do you have a problem that people are staring? No, it's not going to change. I can't do anything about it. They're going to look because I'm different. I probably look at it from a positive of, I'm in the limelight and the spotlight, very much like I was in my sporting days. If you want to look at me, that makes me feel important. I generally probably don't care, because it's in subconsciously, I've not thought about it. But when people do bring it up, it's like, well, I'd not thought about it from that, your perspective that you're bringing it. Does it bother me? No. I'd rather people will speak about it, but obviously the ones who are, what will have no filter will be kids, and they're normally the ones that are being pulled away by their parents. It's like, oh no, I don't want this person to be, but it's like, I don't care. A lot of times I'm in shorts anyway, so I'm probably doing it on purpose. It's like, well, we might as well get that elephant out the room already. It's like, I'm disabled when I'm walking. You can tell that there's something different about me. Let's make it more obvious and kind of go, he or she wants to ask the question. I completely don't mind whatsoever. Obviously the more outlandish the question, the better, because obviously you have to kind of roll with it a little bit more, as opposed to most questions I've probably heard. But I think it's the stereotypical approach maybe of the parents. It's like, well, we've been told to not offend people. Mm-hmm. And we've got to an extent where I think it's gone a little bit crazy, whereas you can't even voice your own opinion without having the backlash from it. It's like you need to maybe go backwards a little bit, and people need to have a little bit of thicker skin. Yes, we need to have empathy towards what's going inside, being involved in being in their side, and having that kindness to kind of step into their shoes from a perspective. But also people need to have a little bit more resilience at times. Is like, is it really hurting your feelings to that bigger extent that you say it is? Probably not. If you took away the ego, which even I have to do from time to time, and take the emotion out of it, well, they have a point. I need to get off the high horse and take that opinion on board.
Mhm. It certainly shows within, how you've been able to hold yourself, whether it's hold yourself accountable or hold yourself, to this standard. And it shows, I think, the mental toughness that you've been able to really, improve throughout, even when you started as a kid, when you had this mentality of, you know, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to get over this hurdle. And I think, if you look on the flip side, a lot of people who do struggle, whether it's with a certain disability or a challenge, they always think that it's going to hold them down. And yours is the complete opposite mindset of, all right, I've got something holding me down, but this is what's going to get me further. This is what I'm going to do to take that next step. And you also spoke about acceptance. And I think, in turn, that's probably one of the biggest things you have to do at first. And it's the one thing that you truly did was, all right, this is who I am, but this is still what I can do. This is what I'm able to move forward. And, as you did that as a young age, I'm sure maybe you can give a little bit of guidance in terms of maybe someone out there who really hasn't been able to reach into that acceptance zone, and really maybe not how did you learn acceptance within your own disability, but maybe what are some steps in order for someone to, you know, make that jump into acceptance of looking within themselves and not, as you're saying, looking towards other people's judgments or other people's criticisms about yourself. How do you learn to look at yourself within, this kind of just open mindset and manner of, all right, this is who I am, and this is what I can do moving forward, even if it's gonna, hold me back a little bit.
I think that's a good point, Brendan. I think, and this is where I think it's become more and more difficult, obviously, with social media, and you're trying to kind of either put a mask on or trying to appease other people. And I think when it comes to acceptance, and this is somebody else's parent that told me this over the weekend, other people are going to tear you down in terms of they're going to do it anyway, be it they don't like you, they want to kind of push you into a box or want to get one over on you. You might as well not do it to yourself as well. And I think obviously as human beings, we're very negative in terms of the way we think anyway. So in terms of being accepting of yourself, obviously you've got to be comfortable in your own skin. And obviously that's a difficult thing to be accepting of be it your appearance, how you look, how you feel going forward. But I think ultimately you need to accept that because people want to tear you down for it no matter what you do. I've been, I won't say abused, but you've got your keyboard warriors who even come at me at times. There's nothing I can do towards to even probably reason with them at times because whatever's going on in their lives, they feel a justification to tear me down or tear me a new one. It's like, well, what gives you the right to technically abuse me just because you're the other side of a computer screen or behind your cellular device? I'm more inclined to, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about it, if I've got nothing good to add to something, I won't give my opinion because ultimately, is it going to serve them going forward? Most of the time, no. It's just me giving my opinion and being very much like everybody else on a thread and giving my 2 cents. Ultimately, if it's maybe from a professional standpoint, I'll butt in because it's like, well, be it weight loss or whatever with my field of expertise. And you'll have people, well, this is what I've tried. Coming back to your point in terms of what's worked for me, it's like, well, that's where people struggle and kind of come to a dead end. It's like, well, I'm taking the advice of Julie over here, Sam over here, whereas in reality, why don't, if it's health related, why don't you go see a doctor? Why don't you go see a pharmacist? If it's related to fitness, why don't you come to sit to a coach like myself? It doesn't have to necessarily be me. Go to people that are more expertise to ask these specific questions. Somebody down the street, it's work for them, doesn't necessarily going to work for you. But coming back to that point in terms of being accepting of yourself, it's hard work. Okay, there's going to become times that throughout your life that you're going to hate yourself, loathe yourself for whatever reason, be midlife crisis, being a teenager, ultimately, you need to look at probably the gratification. And this is something my dad told me when things were going wrong. Just be happy that you wake up the next day and go into bed. That's as grateful as you can be in terms of being happy. It's like you've got to live another day on this earth. It's everything else beyond probably like food, water, and housing. Everything else is materialistic. This in the grand scheme of things shouldn't make me happy. Okay, it gets my voice out there. It does energize me, so it's a positive, but it's not going to define me. And I think this is where people need to be very much at one with themselves in terms of, well, what defines you? What are you happy with? What motivates you to get up and go and do things? Okay, I think I had a lecturer told me from university, and he kind of classified me as the person. I see you as an athlete, an academic, somebody with disability, and I can't remember what the fourth one is, and it bothers me when I can't think of it. But I'm not classified into one box, where I think society as a whole likes to kind of harpoon you. Well, you come from this demographic, so you must fit into this box. I'm like, well, no, I'm quite happy to be on the outside of all of these boxes and be comfortable with myself. And this is probably where, when you're not content with yourself, you become competitive and a little bit very much looking for comparison with other people. You want to either be through a sense of enviousness or jealousy to live this person's lifestyle. Okay, you want to live the good parts of the life. They're not necessary. And social media is a very bad one for this. There's something generally showing or portraying, should I say, the good side of things. You don't know what's going behind the scenes that they want to show you. Whereas I'll show everything. Sometimes the content and the pictures don't go together, but I'm showing you from a content perspective, this is the bad, this is how I've overcome it. It's not all sunshine and roses. I think people associate people with entertainment or sports, their life is easy. They're always happiness. It's like, no, these are probably the most unstable or unhinged people, because they're trying to maximize what a sense is perfection is, or try to aspire to what is perfect all the time, or trying to put on a good show. And ultimately, I think that's changed, because sport is unrecognizable behind the scenes from what I knew as a high-end athlete, from what they get now. Mental health is very much part of it. For me, when I was on it, I shunned it. It's like, yeah, psychology, total garbage. It's for quacks. It's people. Meditation, I said, it's people like sitting in the corner and humming to themselves. I've gone the other way. I've been open to use it as a tool and a resource to be able to relax, and I've excelled with it. Other athletes I know didn't utilize it. They've gone over it. So I think you need to have this open-mindedness as where you're going to be able to get those marginal gains. And okay, I'm talking from a sport perspective, but where can you get those little respites in your life to be able to maximize and be kind of get your own space? Because I think we live in a world where we can't necessarily switch off from the outside perspective, but these tools give you a sense of being able to do it. So be it, I've gone back to Pilates for the first time in 9 months. I know that the instructor wasn't very pleased. Like, James, why did you stop going? It's like, because it served a purpose at that particular time, more for my mental health. And then I've been kind of saying for the last 3-4 months, I should go back for more mobility and flexibility. Oh no, I'll go next week, and I'll go next week, and I'll go next. And I think I kind of took it on myself. Well, if you keep doing this actual situation is never going to improve. And you say to other people, actions speak louder than words. Now go and do it. And ultimately, okay. And I did a post today on Facebook as we're recording. along those lines. Even I, one person, not to be go down the train of being all in, or kind of go 0 to 100 mile an hour. And what do I do differently? I don't look to compete against or compare myself to other people in that class. Some people I knew, some people were new, but most of those people have been going to that class in, week out for 9 months that I've not been there. I'm not going to try and compete and try and do the entirety of the class up here. I'm going to try and find my level, because I know that it's going to be difficult, because I've done it for, I think, like 6 months prior to that. It was a steady progress to be able to get to where I was doing it week in, week out. And it was hard work. And I kind of said, well, the instructor said, "Will we see you next week?" Like, all being well, yes. The next day was not particularly pleasant, but I could see the benefits from doing it. So I think, yes, people have the right intentions to want to start either in January. Some might want to start now, and they have this notion of, I need to pick up the pace now, and that's generally why we see more injuries now, because they're trying to think of, well, I believe that I started back in the end of last year, so I'm going to work at that work rate that as if I've been working for the last 3 months. And you haven't got the foundation built in place. Coaches are the same thing. You'll see some coaches that are implementing their content with people with the summer in mind to get people in shape. They haven't done the work. So you'll see, if people are aware, you start seeing it, and people doing it for, low end budget, because they haven't put the work in. For me, I'm very much the opposite. I've been doing it for putting out content, gosh, probably almost every day. Okay, there's probably day around Christmas I didn't, but I think people can allow me a little bit of a respite from that perspective. But it was constantly giving out value, and giving tools for be able to implement things. And if people actually did it and was aware, you could technically use my content for free and still get the results. But is it willing, coming back to that point of work, are you willing to sacrifice your ego from, I can't do something when it's free because I don't value it? It's like, well, sometimes you can reap the reward, don't have to pay anything out, and still get the reward at the end of the day. And I've looked at most of the care, it's the opposite. People will get the freebie and then don't use it at all. And I'm no different. There's still probably content I've got on my computer I've not looked at. Some I did. I was like, well, let's have a look at what this free stuff is. And I'm thinking, most of that wouldn't have got you very far up further than where you were. And I think it does come down to that investment in yourself. And I think this is where people look at generalize. How are you going to get to the next level? You need to work with somebody that's better than you. Yes, there are outlets people can do themselves. You could say an athlete does it themselves, but obviously me being within that bubble, I would say that's not true. You've got a coach, strength and conditioning coach, nutritionist, psychologist. You're still bouncing things up. Yes, technically you're doing the work, but if it wasn't for them doing the training programs and giving you the work to do, you wouldn't do it. You're not going to pluck it out of thin air and this is me going to turn up to the games. There is this illusion that I think people, even nowadays, will say, oh, for like, especially ex-servicemen, oh, now you're disabled, you can just rock up to the Paralympics. Yeah, if it was that easy, people would have accidents straight. The Olympic athletes would probably, maybe less so, but they would probably find it easy to just transfer across. But that was a motivator for me, because that they made a documentary out of a military trap that'd been injured in, I think it was Iraq, and that was that at that particular time I'd lost my mojo, and I was the person in that sport and hadn't been beaten. I saw that. It's like, no. I've got to. You've got to beat me. You're not gonna. I think it was like 2007. You're not gonna go to the Paralympics until you beat me. It's not a given based on, because you've acquired this disability, now you have a right to be able to put in this. Obviously, it was me. There was like 2-3 other people. That person didn't even make it past the first trials. They made a television program out of it. So it puts it in perspective. Just because you acquire something, it's going to be that easy. And I think from the other perspective of the pendulum, I think it's hard on the people that don't like sport or are not sporty to be judged as, oh, now you have this disability, are you going to go to the Paralympics? And they may never, that's maybe never crossed their mind. You're thinking, well, you're putting an identity onto them that you portray. It's like, I was sporty all along since I was very, very small. I surrounded myself with people that were sporty. So I probably, I'm not surprised looking back at the route that I took. It makes perfect sense in terms of, well, my family is very sporty. I hung around people that were probably obsessed when they were kids with sport. That's all I talked about as a kid. So to be able to probably fulfill a lifelong dream that a lot of kids have was probably very special once I was able to achieve it. Did I think in my early teens that was going to become a reality? No, because obviously I wanted to play everybody's sport. And then I kind of thought, well, this is now unrealistic of goal. What are you going to do instead to be able to be put in that in that domain or that certain industry? Did sport kind of found me again? It fell in my lap, and it was a coach that approached me and said, had you thought about doing disability sport? And even I had prejudice towards the Paralympic movement at being 15, 16 years old, and I have a disability. It's obviously changed in 15 years. It's still got a way to go, but I think the perception towards Paralympic sport vis-a-vis versus Olympic sport is looking more at the athlete versus the disability now. And I think obviously some people will say they're probably the better athlete because they've got to take on the adversity of life on top of being an athlete as well. Whereas I think it's more the show which media likes to portray. And when I do speak to athletes for my podcast or speak to them more generally, we care less about what your life story is, your backstory. I want to ultimately beat you. I don't care how you got here. You're in the way, and that's it. And I think that's across the board. It doesn't matter if you're disabled, able-bodied, what level of sport. You don't care. You're the person that's physically in front of me right now. I have to beat you, humiliate you, whatever I have to do to win, and I don't care how I do it.
It certainly shows the mindset that you were able to curate, and you could definitely see the transition, as you were saying, from looking at it as something with, this prejudice, but then you also, take that leap and then you do what you did. You represented your country at, many different games, and it shows kind of this determination that you had to say, all right, I'm going to take this and I'm going to take this to the next level. And, as you said, you can't just walk into this. You can't just take this next step. And, for you, as you were growing up, maybe before you really transitioned into, wanting to train, wanting to take this next step to, represent yourself at the World Championships, was there someone that you really looked up to in terms of sport, in terms of, someone to bring you to that next level? And was there a transition as you really took that leap into, Paralympics, into these games? Was there, a transition of who you looked up to, or has it been, similar since you were a child and since you've, always been passionate about sport?
I think it has changed over the years. Yeah, I think very much in my early career, there would be other sportsmen and women that were the motivators, as the ones who have longevity in their sport, as to, well, you want to emulate that. And I think once I moved into the probably Paralympic sport, it's like, well, I've seen my peers who I still probably speak to now and again now, even though I'm retired, I grew up around them, be it, as teenagers, you kind of want to emulate your peers as to what they've made it to from development stage to performance.
Mhm.
Well, I want to go there as well. And I think as it's progressed and throughout the career, I think ultimately, and I was asked a good question on one of the other podcasts I'd been interviewed on, as to was it a must versus a need to want to become an athlete. I think it's a little bit of both, because I think ultimately the must was you wanted to make your family proud, make your town proud, and ultimately I think this does scare people when you say, well, you want to make your country proud. And I think depending on how big your country is, do I think about that when I'm on a start line? Do I think about that when I was on court? No, not a chance. Do I think I was? Because put it in perspective, the UK is only 7 million people, so compared to the United States, it's tiny. But did I think about the other, 6 point whatever, excluding myself? No, because that would scare the crap out of me in terms of that perspective. So I think yes. I think first and foremost, yes, I did it for myself because it was a career I wanted to go down. I've had many arguments with family, probably in that career and more laterally, not too long ago, in terms of would I do it again. I was like, yeah, I won't change. Obviously, I would change what I did in the career itself. I would probably, every decision I made, which was ultimately the wrong one, I had to change those. But the one to start off with, I'd do it again, because ultimately that's my identity. It's shaped me to be the individual. There's mistakes and successes along the way, and those have kind of made me. Ultimately, you want to kind of instill into the next generation, don't make my mistakes. But I think you do lose sight if you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. So it's, you want to take those away, but you want to kind of give them a helping hand to kind of go to the next level. It's like, well, if you can learn from my mistakes, not do them, or learn from them and kind of bypass actually making them, you're going to be better for it. And I think, obviously, with your question more specifically, I think trying to take probably from my parents' successes and take it to the next level, in terms of, my mum was, well, if we put it in perspective, county level swimmer in the UK, so like state level, and my dad was a free sport letterman in high school. I won't say there's competition, but I want to take it to the next level in terms of, okay, I've done. There's not a. Wasn't able to do a lot of high school sports, even though I grew up with both parents being in the military. I couldn't do a lot of sports because of obviously being. I would have liked to suit up with the American football team in high school. I would what it was, but I think there's only 1 year I wasn't, and I think it was my senior year, I wasn't allowed to, because we have to have a school medical every year there. One of the doctors is one of the parents of one of the kids on the swim team. Is like, no, American football, no. And all the other years in high school, yes, you can play any sport that you want. Obviously, you got to take some retrospect and think of yourself. Well, that's the only year I wasn't allowed. I was thinking, how come all the other doctors said it's fine, but you say no? But I was, in hindsight, because that is seen as, from a real perspective, as a deficiency, it would probably get targeted. Would I get hurt, or other people get? So I think in hindsight, it was probably the better decision to kind of say, well, no, James, you can't do that. So all the high school sports, I probably did miss out upon. But I think my senior year, he'd been my best friend for years anyway, from school. He kind of said, oh, would you be willing to be the team manager of the soccer team? So with me being probably a yes man, very much back then, it's like, let me think about it, ask family, and is it all right? Because by that time I was development stage in swimming. It's like, can I do this? So I at least get a sense of what sport is like in high school. And mom said to me, ultimately, if it doesn't conflict with swimming, yes. And it did at one point, because it came to a point where we'd had a European Championship down in Germany, where I had to decide, and I had a swimming competition in Belgium, and my mum turned around and said, well, which one do you get paid to do? It's like, and she's still surprised to this day when I say, you were right all along back then. This is about 15 years ago. You were right to say, well, yes, you want to do this to be with your friends and your peers, but is it going to get you to ultimately the goal that you want to do to represent your country? No. This is okay. I didn't ultimately go to the Paralympics in swimming, but it got me towards, well, going to university because of swimming, and then progressing on from there. So if she's still shocked to this day when I say, that conversation we had all those years ago, you were right. And obviously I'm big enough to be able to take that on the chin. I didn't at the time, because I was a teenager, but 18 years old. I thought I knew right. It's like, oh, I want to go over here. I'll probably have some conflicts with swimming at that particular time, and things weren't going well. So it's like, well, this is fun. This is not fun. So that's probably where I was coming from. And I did right at that championship. And success obviously breeds success, and then progressed onto there. And I think, and I was progressing well, and then went from there. So I think obviously that's an adverse situation. I could have gone a different direction, and we have a different conversation altogether.
It certainly shows about, this transition that you made after, you set these goals of representing your country, as well as taking this next step within, your physical realm of saying, all right, I want to compete and I want to represent my country. And, certainly after this, as you have retired, there had to been something else. There had to be something next for you to want to achieve, for you to want to take this next step. And why don't you take this time to share how you made that transition into coaching, and what is the AMP method, and give us a little bit of, a brief introduction in terms of, what you provide for your clients.
Well, it took a long time coming with the coaching, because I think my family wanted me to do it not long after I'd retired. I was like, no, I can't do it, because I'm still struggle with the mindset a little bit, because I get annoyed, frustrated with people occasionally, in terms of I can't relate because I'm a peer, and their goal is a little bit, well, why can't you do the simple things like I can, in terms of, whereas it's probably built in so hardwired. It's like, well, for me it's simple, whereas for them it's when they take little baby steps. And I think it was only until after probably 2 years on the sideline for unemployment that I kind of went, nah, if I can't work for somebody else, and this is a little bit naive, a little bit, why don't I go work for myself and get qualified as a coach, and do my level 3 personal training. Didn't do a lot of research in terms of the company I did it with. Got lucky. So I'd take anybody listening to this, obviously don't do things that I'm doing here and talking about, because it's very naive, and not having like discussions with other people in terms of like the difficulties of working for yourself, etc., etc. Obviously, school doesn't prepare you for going into self-employment whatsoever, but that's a different story and different topic altogether. But I think obviously, coming to your question, Brennan, more specifically to the AMP method, and what I offer more specifically is probably playing on the words of amputee, and using it towards going towards that niche more specifically, as to, well, let's be kind of cliche, as that's more our lingo to use that kind of terminology. We won't say amputee. Generally, it's like, what kind of amputee, or the shorten it even more, where it's like just acronyms, and people within that field would know what it was. But for me, more specifically, I think generally, it's an acronym. The M is adapt, and coming back to the very point that where I came from as a kid. The M is to master the nutrition, to give people to be able to, the resources, the tools, and the knowledge to be able to see nutrition as black and white and not this gray area. And then the P is obviously prove to themselves and to other people that whatever their goal is, they can achieve it.
That's awesome. Thank you, James. I appreciate it. And, for anybody that wants to hear more, we're going to have the links towards James's website below in the show notes. So you can go below and click on his website and see more. There's more details about the AMP method, how to get in contact with James. So that'll provide you more information. But for this part of the episode, I think it was great that we were able to speak about a lot of the physical developments that you've been able to make, as well as, we did speak about some of those mental aspects of you gaining this mental toughness throughout. But for the next episode, we're going to be speaking more within mental development and what it really took you to curate this toughness, curate this mindset in order to reach some of these goals that you've been able to, whether you've had some things pulling you back. And, for anybody listening, it doesn't have to be that you have a physical disability. It could be a mental one. There's many different aspects of things that you can be pulled back from, but James is going to share those steps in order for you to learn to accept and learn to take that next step. So thank you guys all for listening to this first part of the episode, and please be sure to tune into part 2 with James Roberts. This was episode number 14 of season 2 of the Mental Insights podcast.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.